you take an at-home DNA test for fun. A few weeks later, the results come back, full of percentages and pie charts about where your ancestors supposedly wandered. Most people skim it and move on. But here's a number that almost never makes it into those reports. Roughly 1 in every 200 men alive on Earth right now shares an unusual, nearly identical Y-chromosome with one specific man who died nearly 800 years ago. Not a vague, you're probably related to everyone if you go back far enough kind of connection. A direct, traceable male bloodline. The man is Genghis Khan, and the real story behind that number is far stranger and far darker than a fun fact on a 23andMe report. To understand how one man's bloodline ended up inside an estimated 16 million living men, you have to go back to a boy nobody expected to survive childhood, let alone conquer half the known world. His name was Temujin, and he was born around 1162 on the Mongolian steppe, into a world with no mercy built into it. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the only surviving account written from inside the Mongol court itself, his father was poisoned by a rival clan when Temujin was just a child. That's the primary source. What happened next is harder to confirm with total certainty, but the broad outline is widely accepted by historians. Without his father's protection, Temujin's own clan abandoned his family on the open steppe, leaving his mother to raise 5 children alone, surviving on roots, fish, and whatever they could scavenge through brutal Mongolian winters that regularly dropped well below freezing. Temujin was later captured by a rival clan and forced to wear a wooden collar called a kangwe, a portable prison locked around his neck and wrists, designed to humiliate him in front of an entire camp. He escaped, reportedly hiding in a river using a hollowed-out length of wood to breathe. He had to. Everything that came after depended on it. The same source describes another formative moment, one historians treat with a little more caution since it comes filtered through a later political myth-making. Temujin's young bride, Borte, was kidnapped by a rival tribe shortly after their marriage. Rather than abandon her, Temujin called in alliances from neighboring clans and went to war to get her back, an early demonstration of the alliance-building instincts that would later let him unite the entire Mongolian plateau. Whether every detail in that account happened exactly as written is genuinely debated among historians. What isn't debated is the pattern it set. From his earliest years, Temujin survived by turning humiliation and loss into leverage, again and again, until there was no one left on the steppe who could humiliate him. That's the part of his story most documentaries actually show you. Here's where it gets stranger. By 1206, this formerly enslaved, abandoned boy had united every major tribe on the Mongolian plateau under a single banner, and the assembled chieftains gave him a new name. Genghis Khan, roughly translating to universal ruler. Over the next 2 decades, he built what historians widely agree was the largest contiguous land empire ever assembled by a single person, stretching from the Pacific coast of China toward Eastern Europe. By the time of his death in 1227, his armies had conquered roughly double the territory Alexander the Great ever controlled at his peak, and within a few decades, under Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons, that empire would balloon even further, eventually covering close to a quarter of the entire planet's land surface, an area historians have compared to the size of the African continent. For comparison, that's an empire larger than the Roman Empire and the British Empire combined, built not by one dynasty over centuries, but mostly within one lifetime and the lifetimes of his immediate children. It's worth pausing on how unlikely that is. Most of history's largest empires were built gradually, stitched together by generations of different rulers, each adding a province here, a kingdom there. Genghis Khan's empire mostly happened within about 25 years, starting from a man who, as a teenager, didn't control so much as a single permanent settlement. By any conventional measure of speed versus scale, nothing else in recorded history comes close. The body count behind that achievement is genuinely staggering. Some historians estimate Mongol conquest killed somewhere between 20 and 40 million people, a number large enough that some researchers argue it temporarily cooled the planet's climate simply because so much farmland was abandoned and reclaimed by forest. Entire cities that resisted Mongol demands for surrender were sometimes destroyed so completely that their populations would take centuries to recover if they recovered at all. This isn't a story with a clean hero, but here's the counterintuitive twist that rarely makes it into the popular image of Genghis Khan as a pure, mindless barbarian. The historian and anthropologist Jack Weatherford, in his widely read book Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, argues that behind the brutal conquests sat one of the more sophisticated state builders of the medieval world. Weatherford points to policies that look startlingly modern. Genghis Khan established religious freedom across his empire at a time when most rulers executed people for the wrong faith. He created a meritocratic promotion system inside his army, where a soldier's family background mattered less than loyalty and skill, a radical departure from the rigid noble bloodlines that ran most armies of the era. He built and protected the Silk Road trade routes so thoroughly that merchants could reportedly cross the entire continent without being robbed, an era some historians have nicknamed the Pax Mongolica. He commissioned a writing system for the Mongolian language, which had previously had none. He also built one of the first long-distance messaging networks in history, a relay system of mounted riders and supply stations called the Yam, capable of moving messages and intelligence across thousands of miles faster than almost anything in Europe at the time would manage for centuries afterward. His military innovations were just as influential as his political ones. Mongol armies were famous for psychological warfare, deliberately spreading exaggerated rumors of their own brutality ahead of an invasion, so that some cities would simply surrender rather than risk a siege. They also built extensive spy and scout networks before ever approaching a city, gathering detailed intelligence on a region's defenses, politics, and internal rivalries, then exploiting those divisions before a single arrow was fired. It's a strategy historians still study in modern military academies. Not every historian buys the full picture Weatherford paints. The historian Timothy May, reviewing the book, called several of its central claims controversial, and pushed back hard on the idea that Genghis Khan deserves to be remembered as some kind of proto-modern reformer, rather than a conqueror whose empire was, first and foremost, built on devastating, deliberate violence. That tension between ruthless destroyer and accidental architect of global trade is still actively argued over in academic circles today. Both things can be true at once, and historians don't fully agree on how to weigh them against each other. What almost nobody disagrees on is what happened to his body. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, likely during a military campaign against the Western Xia kingdom, his followers buried him in a way deliberately designed to erase all evidence of the location. According to multiple historical accounts, the burial party reportedly killed anyone who witnessed the procession, then had soldiers ride thousands of horses back and forth over the burial site to flatten any trace of disturbed earth. Trees may have been planted over the area. To this day, despite drone surveys, satellite imaging projects, and multiple international expeditions into Mongolia, the location of Genghis Khan's tomb has never been found. The single most powerful man of his era is buried somewhere on Earth, and not one confirmed trace of the grave has ever surfaced. So the body vanished completely. The bloodline did the opposite. In 2003, the geneticist Chris Tyler Smith and his research team studied Y-chromosome data. The genetic marker passed almost unchanged from father to son, across 16 populations spanning Asia. They found something startling. Roughly 8% of men across a huge swath of the former Mongol Empire, from northeast China through Central Asia, shared a nearly identical Y-chromosome lineage. Extrapolated across the world's population, that pattern suggested around 16 million living men, roughly 1 in every 200 males on the planet, descend in an unbroken male line from a single man who lived around 800 years ago. Tyler Smith's team couldn't test Genghis Khan's actual DNA, since his tomb has never been found, so the link relies on circumstantial reasoning rather than a direct sample. But the timing, geography, and historical record of his sons and grandsons, fathering enormous numbers of children with conquered noblewomen across the empire, line up almost perfectly with the genetic data. It remains the leading explanation among the scientists who study it, even if it can't be called fully proven. Which brings you back to that DNA test sitting in your inbox. You probably think of your Ancestry results as a fairly neutral piece of trivia. A percentage here, a migration map there. But Genghis Khan's genetic footprint is a reminder that history doesn't just live in textbooks and museum placards, it's sitting inside the actual biology of millions of people walking around today, most of whom have no idea they're carrying it. An empire most people can barely place on a map, built by a man whose own grave was erased on purpose, somehow became one of the most successful biological legacies any single human being has ever left behind. Not because he tried to be remembered, because conquest, on a scale that size, rewrites populations in ways that outlast every flag, every border, and every empire that came after his. It also says something uncomfortable about what actually survives, across history in general. Not the version of a person that they intended to leave behind, not even necessarily their name. Sometimes what outlasts everything else is just the raw biological consequence of what they did while they were alive, multiplying quietly for centuries after the empire itself has completely disappeared. You build a career, raise a family, try to leave something behind that feels intentional and chosen. Genghis Khan, by most accounts, was obsessed with exactly that kind of control too, controlling his army, his trade routes, his image, even the precise location of his own grave. And the part of him that ended up traveling the furthest into the future wasn't any of that. It was something almost entirely outside his control, an unplanned biological footprint spreading through a war he was actively fighting at the time, with consequences he never could have calculated or intended. So next time a DNA test pops up a strange Central Asian trace in your results, you might want to take a second look at it. There's a decent chance you're carrying a tiny, anonymous piece of the man whose own grave the world has been searching for, unsuccessfully, for almost 800 years. Not his name, not his empire. Just a fragment of biology, riding quietly inside you, completely indifferent to whether you ever find out it's there. If this changed the way you think about money, there's someone else in history who will change it again. Subscribe. I'll find them for you.